Everyone loves to talk about the armor of God in Ephesians 6. It makes for great visuals and flannel board presentations and VeggieTales episodes. It's fun to talk about getting suited up and patrolling into the world to take down the enemy. But I feel like in talking about the armor of God, we rarely talk about, and I mean really talk about, the seriousness and gravity of the threat posed by the enemy. We mention it's the schemes of the devil, get him! And we create this kind of cartoonish idea about who Satan is and how he plots against humanity, and we kind of shrug it off like it doesn't even affect us. So in this episode, we're talking about the why behind the armor of God. Why do we need to put this armor on? This impacts your ability to walk in godliness more than you may think. I'm talking schemes of the devil today on New Heart Life. I'm Kevin Lehman, and I'm a pastor and a biblical counselor in Wilmington, North Carolina. If this episode is helpful to you, it would mean so much to me if you would consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. I hope sincerely that you enjoy the show. In the latter half of Ephesians 6, Paul lays out this intricate plan for armoring ourselves up so that we can stand against the spiritual darkness that pervades this world. We spend a lot of time focused on the armor when we come to this passage, but I rarely hear anyone do a deep dive, unless you're like a Michael Heiser fanatic, on the need for the armor. So we talk about the armor, but we tend to evade and not talk about the need for the armor. So that poses questions and creates questions like, what exactly is it from which we're defending ourselves? Why do we need a full suit of armor? Is what we're up against really that dangerous? Why would Paul spend such a large portion of his letter talking about it if this is something that doesn't really affect Christians? And in that large portion of his letter, it's important to realize that Paul doesn't dive straight into the armor of God. He spends 3 verses prior to the armor talking about the need for the armor. His point is that we must armor up because we're at war with something far greater than what we can see. And so in this second episode of the series on spiritual warfare, and even kind of a mini series on the armor of God, I want to look at Ephesians 6:11, where Paul says, put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. So God wants us to put on this armor, which we'll go into great detail here in a few verses. But there's also this specific reason he wants us to put on this armor. And it's not just so that we can be good Christians, and it's not so that we can have a good time at church or a great worship experience. It's not so Mary Lou leaves us alone at work, and it's not because the devil is trying to take our money and health and prosperity away, and we need this armor to protect those things. It's because a very, very dangerous adversary is seeking to destroy us. He wants to bring us down through moral failure and fear. He wants to prevent us from doing our very purpose, from accomplishing our very purpose, which is to put God's greatness on display. And we can't do that if we're living in sin and we're living afraid. You know, my good friend Gianni asked me in regard to the last episode, how are we to call on this strength and might of Christ in a time of need? He's talking about that strength and might that we saw in verse 10. And I think there's definitely an element of being on the offensive in the heat of a battle. But I also think that strength and might is inherent to you because of the new heart God has given you. The Spirit of God has taken up residence in you. You serve as a temple, more like a tabernacle for now, for the glory of God. And so that strength and might is already there. You've just got to learn how to use it. But I also think that Paul gives us some hints right here in verse 11. He says that we wear the armor so that we are able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. The idea of this word for stand firm is that we are to hold our ground. We aren't to go on the offensive, but we also are not to be pushed backwards. there's also this lasting and incorruptible element to this word. And so in the armor of God, we are truly able to stand without being shaken or corrupted. So we see this element then where we prepare ourselves before the battle ever takes place. There's a putting on of the armor long before we ever think we might need it. And it's not that the armor is going to prevent attacks from happening. We know that isn't the case because the language here is honestly, it's quite active. We are standing firm against a very real and a very present danger. Later, Paul is going to talk about the flaming arrows that barrage us. It's not like, the demonic archers aren't shooting because you're wearing the armor. They are unleashing on your armor constantly, hoping to find a chink to expose you. And so I think there's a whole lot more emphasis just on the preparedness here than there is on any kind of offensive calling down on the power of Christ in the midst of battle. Though, I do think that's a perfectly appropriate thing to do as long as it's kept within biblical principles. But that still leaves the question, what are these schemes of the devil? Well, the Greek word for schemes here is really just a general word that means strategies. So we don't get a lot of answers there other than the obvious. But the word for against, the Greek word pros, has the idea of face-to-face or alongside something or someone. So whatever this battle is with the schemes of the devil, they are intimately close. One commentator pictured it as two fighters in a ring where neither can run very far. And then the idea here that diablos is used to describe Satan here, the devil. This puts a strong emphasis on his deception and his slandering, because his primary strategy is of lies, and that's what's at the forefront here in this passage. And so when we put this all together, here's what I see. The schemes of the devil most often represent demonic forces employing deceptive and deceiving accusations and thoughts, and sometimes encounters against you, against the believer. And this is carried out in a manner where they are right in your face, constantly looking for an opening. And like a fighter in a cage, you're standing your ground donned with the armor of God. But you have to keep your guard up because this is close quarters combat. Remember, it's face to face for the most part. And so you often don't have time to see these attacks coming, which is why you need to be armored up prior to the attack beginning. But also, and hear this, the more you train, the more the battle will slow down for you. You'll start to see things develop ahead of time. Your reaction times will be quicker. And this is a real phenomenon that happens with real fighters. I have a lot of friends who are professional fighters at the highest level. And one thing they will tell you is that the more reps you get in and the more time you spend in the ring and the more time you spend engaging and being prepared for an opponent, the slower everything seems to work while you're in the throes of battle. And so the more you stand your ground in this battle, the more you're going to start understanding the strategies that are being employed against you. And you'll start getting better and better at repelling the schemes of the devil. And so in the next video, I'm really going to dive into what these attacks look like in our day-to-day lives, most particularly the internal attacks that come, the thought-based ones. But listen, beloved, for now, you need to get suited up. Do not wait for things to get bad before you start putting your armor on. No soldier runs out onto the battlefield, no sane soldier anyway, and gets impaled by a sword and then runs back to camp to put his armor on over it. No, once you're impaled, it's over. You've lost. You're not getting back to camp. So put your armor on. And if you don't know how to do that, keep watching, because we're going to walk through each element of this together. So please don't go looking for a fight, but rather stand firm. 3 times just in this little passage, Paul is going to say, stand firm. Don't give up an inch of ground in this battle, okay? That's all I've got for today, but we're coming back soon. I'm typically around for questions, so hit me up in the comments if needed. As always, you can support the show with likes and shares and subscribes and positive reviews. Thank you so much for listening, and continue to stand firm, and God bless.